Welcome everyone to Dr. John Bedker's Leadership Podcast, the podcast focused on leadership. The episode will begin shortly. Thank you so much for tuning in. Enjoy the podcast.
Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Dr. John Bedker Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, John Bedker. Well, Happy New Year. I really mean that. It really is a good new year. I like to start off that beginning of each year, positive, affirmative. That's what leaders should do, and that's what I will endeavor to do. Today, we're going to take a look ahead. Many leadership challenges will confront our world this year, our turbulent world, sometimes a chaotic world. Let me begin by just taking a quick run around the world. Begin with the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. Well, he's going to have a number of leadership challenges, and as the year unfolds, I'm certain we'll highlight them for sure. Here's just a few. Obviously, the war. Key leadership challenge in this long war. Effectively, David versus Goliath. But the David has done incredibly well. So, the leadership challenges of that war this year, I think, will be particularly pointed. What about it? Well, first, managing Trump, the President of the United States. A very significant leadership challenge for Zelensky going forward. What about retaining the backing and the trust of the Ukrainian people? Hugely important and another significant leadership challenge. There are a number of state issues confronting Zelensky as well, not the least of which is internal corruption, which he seems to continue to address, but seems to continue to pop up. The economy, no small thing, a huge leadership challenge about how Ukraine will stay afloat. And lastly, and importantly throughout this podcast today, the issue of human exhaustion. The depletion of young men in Ukraine, the exhaustion of families, friends, societies, workers, a huge human challenge of leadership for the president of Ukraine. What about the neighbor, the person who invaded, Vladimir Putin? Well, we have to ask ourselves sort of an important leadership question regarding him. What happens when your word is not a bond, when it's hollow, when it can't be believed? Well, he's had a very successful run at that, frankly, in effectively playing the President of the United States, continuing to get what he wants. By that I mean the President of Russia, at the expense, certainly of Zelensky, and certainly at the absolute embarrassment of the President of the United States. Well, that issue is going to be a really important leadership issue in 2026 because it's going to involve the role of autocrats, how they go about their life's work to be autocratic leaders, and how it's playing out. How's it working? So that's going to be a huge role. Similarly, in the country of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, the leader there, similar song, second verse. Can he continue to handle things from a leadership point of view the way he has? Well, like Russia, I think we're going to find this out in 2026. Like Russia, one-sided peace plans don't work. They're not sustainable. They neither lead to or achieve peace. And while we know the majority of Israelis absolutely would love to have peace, this is not the path of Benjamin Netanyahu for many reasons. So, another important leadership story to stay close to in 2026. More recently, we'd certainly talk about the former now, I guess, President Maduro in Venezuela. And here we have to ask that leadership question: do ends justify means? Think about that from a leadership point of view. We all know that answer, though. No. Leaders need to be process-driven, not outcome-based. This is one of those leadership fundamentals we all know. But to see a leader fail to practice it on both sides, Maduro and Trump, to not be process-driven, but to be outcome-based. So, ends justifying means? No. But that story has much, much further to go, as Maduro has now been indicted in the United States. And what remains is really a huge series of questions about the governing and leadership in Venezuela. So, mentioned this a few times, but we have to ask ourselves a question from a leadership point of view. Where is this most glaring? Well, either fortunately or unfortunately, we have to conclude clearly: in the President of the United States, Donald Trump. Let's just go to the basics again. As I mentioned before, being process-driven, not outcome-based. Sure. What we're talking about here, folks, is really Leadership 101. Basic leadership. Plan, organize, direct, staff, and control. This is what leaders do, day in, day out. And they continuously improve it, over and over again. They make a plan. They make it a good plan, and they stick to it. Again, this is really Leadership 101. But it is not present in Donald Trump's world. Now, his is more a scattershot, a ricochet rabbit, if you will, approach. It is not leadership. It's scary. Frankly, it's frightening. So, what do we do? Well, in the United States, we hope that we had anticipated that because of our history, that we have a constitution, that we have 3 equal branches of government, and the rule of law in our arsenal. Well, unfortunately, currently, the answer to each of those is no. We're not having those at the moment. They are technically present, but practically and operationally not present. Critical for leaders. The Congress of the United States has shown fealty to an autocrat, Donald Trump, not oversight. It's not exercising its power of the purse, specifically given in the Constitution, to the Congress. Not even the basics of leadership. Should a leader, a person elected to represent their constituents in a particular part of a state, or a state together, in the case of the U.S. Senate, to speak up and speak out when American values and Americans are trampled on. That's their job. That's what they were elected to do. And we are not seeing that in many cases. So there may be many stories to tell from a leadership point of view in 2026 going forward with that group. So what lies ahead for leaders and the practice of leadership in 2026? I want to quote just a few data points. I think that's important. I'm going to continue to do that throughout this coming year. An article on a blog, DDI. They talk about leadership trends in 2026. What's next for leaders and organizations. It's an article written by Stephanie Neal and Rosie Rhine. Give them full attribution. They say leadership entering 2026 is at a pivotal crossroads. Well, I think nothing could be more true. This podcast, was founded upon the unfortunate turbulence and chaos in our world, absolutely requiring leadership. So their latest piece, this piece on global leadership forecast, confirms the urgency facing organizations. Here's some data points. 71% of leaders are under increased stress. Pretty huge number, 71% increased stress, causing 40% to consider leaving their jobs. That, folks, causes a pause, does it not? 40% of leaders considering leaving their jobs because of the stresses placed on them in today's turbulent and troubled world. 77% of the chief human resource officers say that the bench strength, the people in the organizations performing critical leadership roles, are thinning, and at a time when it is needed more and more, particularly with the advances in technology. So, a few data points there. The number of people leaving is really quite amazing, or considering leaving, I should say more completely. Talks about the advent of artificial intelligence, AI, and what that may do to the workplace, to work itself, and certainly to workers. The thing that's important, the takeaway, I think, from this piece, and I want to really highlight it, is the critical role of leaders and leadership, because they are the ones that bring empathy, that bring authenticity and presence to their organizations. Folks, AI can't do that, doesn't do that. Humans do that. And human leaders are critical in delivering that. So let's really be mindful about that as we go forward. Okay, so just a quick look at the article, some of the comments from DDI in their piece. Let's talk about our bigger world again for a little bit. The clash between autocracy and democracy is going to continue. In fact, folks, I'm going to say I believe it's going to heighten in 2026. The forces of good and the forces of evil are going to continue to escalate, and who is more present, good or evil, remains to be seen. And again, this podcast will highlight that. But this will be a clash between the autocratic leaders and the democratic leaders, and how that plays out. Integral to this is the clash between capitalism and democracy, something we've spoken about previously on this podcast. These clashes will be viewed in the context of both perceived and real successes of authoritarianism and the autocratic state. A clash of two very different approaches to leadership. And this is going to become a central theme. Think about the beginning of this podcast, talking about, for instance, Russia's invasion of Ukraine. An autocratic leader forcibly, militarily invading a democratic and sovereign state. One supports the people, the many, and the others the few. They're seeking a society of oligarchs in the subservience of the people. Very, very different models. A stark contrast to that, leaders, people in our world will be increasingly confronted in 2026. This clash, again, with many tentacles between autocracy and democracy. Folks, this is the race to see who will win. And we're going to have to really keep an eye on that as leaders, because the contrasting style of leadership for the autocrat to subordinate the people, to have a few at the top control, or to perhaps flatten an organization with the advent of AI, but do it in a way that is human-driven and human-controlled. A place where democracy, where we, the people, for us, for collectivism to prevail. Our podcast this year, folks, is going to bring you these confrontations. We're going to detail, we're going to highlight, we're going to illuminate those that strive to do the right thing, the central mission of leadership. Those that strive to do the right thing. And those that seek to advance the interests of the few. The autocrats, the dictator, the oligarchs. Leadership has never been more critical in our turbulent world. So folks, I am so grateful that each of you has been tuning in during the time of this podcast. I'm certainly pleased you're here today, but I really would like you to continue to tune in. 2026 is going to be a critical year for leaders and leadership. We don't want to lose sight of the events, and in so doing, we'll highlight people, we'll highlight activities, we'll highlight choices and decisions that leaders are making. We'll highlight, hopefully, the good as often as we can. We'll also look at those that fall short. Whoever they are, wherever they may be from, this isn't a podcast about leadership. So who shines and who does not is not a matter of politics or party affiliation. It is a matter of leadership, and we will enduringly hang our hat on that. Okay, everyone. Welcome to 2026. Happy New Year. I'm so pleased you've tuned in. For today, that's it. We'll talk soon.
Thank you for tuning in to Dr. John Bedker's Leadership Podcast. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please tell your friends, and, of course, please follow our podcast and subscribe. Thank you again for tuning in.